Greetings, everyone. Yes, this is Peg Brady from NOAA Fisheries, and welcome to our 2023 NOAA Fisheries Ecosystem-Based Management Seminar Series. Today, the series continues, which began back in November 2017, and our aim is to increase awareness about ecosystem-based management and the work that's being done within NOAA Fisheries, and as well with our partners. So we've had a number of speakers come in from our partner organizations. The library has been a great co-host with this series, and these seminars are often offered on the second Wednesday of each month from 3 to 4, with the exception of next month. We're going to take a break next month and resume in September. So, and as Lisa pointed out, each presentation is available and accessible and recorded and archived at the NOAA YouTube site. Following today's presentation, there'll be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions, and Lisa will field those questions to our speaker today. And our speaker today is Dr. Bridget Ferriss, who I've had the pleasure of working with back some years ago in headquarters. She's a research fisheries biologist at the NOAA Alaska Fisheries Science Center, which is based in Seattle. So I just really want to welcome Bridget, and also acknowledge her team members that are all noted here on the cover slide: Elizabeth Seiden, Yvonne Ortiz, and Stephanie Zador. So thanks to you all for providing this presentation to us today, and also to Bridget for presenting. So I'll turn it over to you, Bridget. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Peg and Lisa. Hello, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. I appreciate being here. This is a great webinar series that I listened to, and I've learned a lot in the past year, so it's really an honor to be part of it. Today, as Peg mentioned, I'll be presenting on behalf of our Ecosystem Status Report team listed here: Elizabeth Seiden, Yvonne Ortiz, and Stephanie Zador. All their email addresses are there, and I also list them at the end. And we always have an open door and welcome any thoughts, feedbacks, potential collaborations, anything you think of. We would love to hear from you. And I'll be discussing our ecosystem status reports in Alaska. We've just hit our 30-year milestone of production, and some of that, I'll be going through some of that evolution and then what they look like now, and then results from a review we had this year and ongoing discussion of where we might be headed. All right, there we go. So as I mentioned, ecosystem information has been included in our Alaska ground fish stock assessment and fishery evaluation reports, or SAFE reports, as either ecosystem considerations or then retermed to ecosystem status reports for over 30 years. This effort has evolved over time in parallel with many individual group efforts, both at the Alaska Center, our broader Alaska community, the national level, international level. We've all been on this learning process along with all the other regions, and obviously that will continue. But we're taking the opportunity this year to open up our process and goals of the ESRs in Alaska to assess how we're doing and really where to prioritize, what directions to prioritize in the future. This has involved internal discussions with the ESR team, the Alaska Science Center, also with the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and also, as I mentioned this year, we had an external review process that I'll discuss in this presentation. So we're still in the middle of these discussions. So what I'm mentioning here today, these are not finalized next steps for our ESRs, but more going through some of the potential, perhaps more high-level unanimous recommendations we got from the review and ones that we're considering and talking about. So in Alaska, just as a quick overview, we have 5 large marine ecosystems, ranging from the South Gulf of Alaska up to Aleutian Islands, Eastern Bering Sea, and then into the Arctic with the Chukchi and Beaufort Sea. So these marine ecosystems are really quite different, ranging in oceanography, ecology, fishing industries, and communities. As far as the federally managed commercial fisheries go, we have 2 groundfish fishery management plans, one for the Gulf of Alaska, one for the combined Eastern Bering Sea, one crab management plan for the Bering Sea. There's no commercial fishing in the Arctic right now, and so we just have the land of Alaska. Examples are in those pictures, but it includes some of the more common fish that we all know and love, like the walleye pollock, Pacific cod, sablefish, also rockfish, Pacific ocean perch, northern rockfish, numerous flatfish like arrowtooth flounder, and then of course crab fisheries also like snow crab, king crab. So these are all under that groundfish and crab umbrella. Reports are really a primary tool to bring ecosystem information into the groundfish fishery harvest. For the outline of my presentation, we'll be going through the history of the ecosystem status reports in Alaska, and I'll be calling these the ESRs, and then discuss what they look like today, and then into the future of what directions we might possibly go in, and go through the review and recommendations by the committee of independent experts that we received. So ecosystem status reports in Alaska, we started in 1995. These were a general discussion of ecosystem-based management. There were Alaska-wide indicators, not LME specific, and these were an annual appendix to the stock assessments. There was one lead author, an editor, and over time, the development of these reports focused on selecting and displaying indicators. For example, like which indicators should we be including, and what should those figures really look like, how to best communicate the information. These documents grew over time into pretty large documents, up to about 200 pages today. But in the meantime, in about 2012, there was an intentional decision to focus more on informing the acceptable catch as really an on-ramp for this information into management decisions. And so the idea here was really to make the information as applicable as possible to fisheries management decisions. And so along those same lines, in 2016, the one report for Alaska was split into 3 by large marine ecosystem, and that was Gulf of Alaska, Eastern Bering Sea, and Aleutian Islands. And again, really trying to identify ecologically meaningful indicators and assessments that could really maximize uptake into management. So then we've also, over perhaps the past 5 years or so, really expanded outreach and communication efforts beyond the immediate council. So what this looks like is presentations, interactions with the community and industry, videos. We've also started producing annually what we're calling in briefs, which is this top image. It's a 4-page, glossy, more plain language description or summary of our ESRs. We produce one again for each ESR, for each LME. And this really just communicates more broadly the current ecosystem status as we assess it through the ESRs. And so we find this really helps on our communication and also helping build our community of contributors, and also help build understanding and trust into what we're doing with the ESRs and the EBFM process through the council in general. I'll just pause there. Is my sound still okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. So moving on then to what do ESRs look like today, and how are we using them to inform management? So I'm starting here to show some high-level characteristics of the ESRs. And I'm starting here because each region in the US produces ESRs, or ecosystem status reports, but there are differences in the process, timing, and goals of these efforts all around the country. So in Alaska, we produce one report for each of our 3 large marine ecosystems, as I mentioned, that support federally managed groundfish fisheries. And these are produced each year in the fall. The timing is important to integrate with the stock assessment and harvest specification process. And these are actually included in the final stock assessment and fisheries evaluation reports with the assessments. but also, as I'll mention in a few slides, we really try to integrate into the process leading up to those final assessments as well. The primary goal of the ESRs is to inform the acceptable biological catch, or the ABC, and this is considered really, we think of this more as a really tactical level of support. We're looking at short-term decisions that are kind of that immediate decision-making that'll inform the ABCs for next year. So we're really looking at this year and next year and trying to really summarize, create an annual narrative of the marine ecosystem status and how that relates to the groundfish and crab. So these, oh, and then finally, definitely our audience is to support the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and that includes their advisory bodies, the plan teams, the Science and Statistical Committee, and the advisory panel, and the council itself. And so this has all been constantly evolving and tailored over the years, really in our efforts to best assess that narrative and how to best communicate it and integrate it into the harvest specification process. And so I'm going to just high level go through what our ESR reports look like. We start with this first section, the report cards. These are a subset of our indicators. They're time series representing different components of the ecosystem. We present them in a standardized ticker tape format. We try to stick to the same indicators each year for each of our LMEs, and we also, for the Gulf and Aleutian Islands, Gulf of Alaska and Aleutian Islands, produce these report cards for subregions within our LMEs. So this is kind of a quick look at how the ecosystems are doing. We then have an assessment. This is a qualitative synthesis. It's a narrative of the current year marine ecosystem status, along with predictions for the upcoming year. And this is really one of the more important parts of our whole report. The lead editor writes this by synthesizing all the contributions received, and we do our best to integrate all the different indicators, to identify the big picture trends across our system, to balance the weight of evidence from all the different information we receive, and then when we can, to link that to groundfish and crab and to the broader ecosystem status. In a qualitative way, we find that so far that's our best approach to really integrating all types of information, not just quantitative time series, but also other qualitative observations and different types of knowledge. But this comes together really quickly in the fall because we're receiving contributions all the way up to the end, because our contributions largely represent within year observations. So for example, in 2023, in the fall this year, we'll be producing these ESRs and using data that represents the marine ecosystem in 2023. So data is coming off the surveys from the lab, straight from the communities. And so we're turning it around really quickly. And so this assessment is really the basis for what we then present to the council and use in our outreach material, like the in-briefs. We have another section called Noteworthies that is near the front to really draw attention. And this section highlights unique or emerging or new contributions of note that are not routine annual indicators. And so this really helps with our flexibility, where we can capture one-off events or emerging topics that we think the council might be interested in. So for example, here, the arrival of the invasive green crab in Alaska that's been moving north along our coast, and whether should be of consideration when thinking about groundfish or not, seabird die-offs, other topics that come up. And then finally, the bulk of the report are these indicators. These are individual contributions by a long list of collaborators, both within and outside of the Alaska Science Center. And we have this is a table of contents of these indicators, and this is the same across all three of our ESRs. But we really range from less data available in the Aleutian Islands to the most data available in the Bering Sea. And so we have varying levels of breadth or depth in each of these categories. So we definitely have more information on the physical oceanography, zooplankton, and groundfish from our surveys. We do produce, along with the help of collaborators, a couple of synthesis sections where we pull together multiple data streams and sources of information on seabirds and physical oceanography. And then areas where we definitely know we could improve or we have gaps are representing human dimensions and social economics, representing different sources of knowledge like local and traditional knowledge, producing more integrated and synthesis of all this information, and also short-term predictions like 1, 2, 3 years out. So how is this used to inform management? Again, we focus on the ABCs, or the acceptable biological catch, and this is how those decisions are made. It starts with that stock assessment model on the left-hand side, and these are the stock assessment authors. These models using various data, and sometimes some ecosystem data like temperature are in those models, and sometimes no ecosystem data in the models. And that produces a recommended maximum acceptable biological catch that then gets reviewed by the groundfish plan teams and moves through the council process, through the scientific statistical committee that produces the final, produces a maximum acceptable biological catch and accepted by the council. So how does the ESR fit in here? Kind of all over, which is by design. So what we are trying to do and what we really see value in is entering the process early, trying to bring ecosystem information into the process early and repeated in different ways. And so what this looks like is at the beginning, we are talking with assessment authors as they're running their models, and we have discussions to inform risk tables. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about really what risk tables are, but it's a part of each full stock assessment. And this is where we can directly bring some ecosystem information relevant to each stock into the process. And this is in collaboration with the stock assessment authors that they then transmit up through the council process through these risk tables. We also then give presentations to these different bodies, the plan teams and the different bodies in the council, along with our final ecosystem status reports. And so this ecosystem information is percolating through the system, and we're also presenting at different stages, but also it's coming up through the risk table route and through our ESR team presentations. And in this way, we can kind of be in the conversation pretty early on to the development of that final maximum acceptable biological catch. Another way to think about how the process of our ESRs is in a timeline. And so we've really expanded to most of the year, even though our focus is at the very end, which is that December council meeting where they set these harvest specifications, where the star is. But we start on the left in May with a workshop that is intended to give us a preview of how the system is shaping up this year. What are the conditions in the Alaska marine environment? How are the fisheries doing? What should we be starting to think about and monitoring? Perhaps even having an early warning if needed to the council if there's, for example, a major heat wave that we think could have impacts on the groundfish. And we move along to collecting information, starting to collect our contributions for the ESRs, presenting to the groundfish plan team in September. I'm moving along to number 4 at the bottom here. We present to the council a short preview of our ecosystem status reports and kind of an early warnings if there's something they should be thinking about before that December meeting, so there's no surprises. Again, risk table conversations with the assessment authors in October, that's number 5. Number 6, back to the plan team. And then number 7 is really the final goal, which is our final meeting where the council is determining the harvest specifications for the following year. And we're presenting all the ecosystem information, but also they're hearing about it through these risk tables from the assessment authors. So you can see we've really got an extended process here. Early and often is our goal. And so I'll just take one moment, because I know I've mentioned it a few times now, to go more in depth on these risk tables, because these are rising in priority for us as we're realizing really what a valuable step these are in kind of an on-ramp to getting ecosystem information into this process. And so these risk tables were created in 2018. Martin Zorn and Stephanie Zedor And you can read that citation there for more information. These are unique in Alaska right now, and we use them to document concerns external to the stock assessment model. So what that means is, here is a place to document information that's not included in the stock assessment models, but might still be relevant and influence the maximum acceptable biological catch. And it's a way to consider them in a more qualitative way, in a transparent way, in a more way. And so there's 4 columns of information here. I highlighted the ecosystem considerations. That's primarily where our ESRs support the authors in producing that column. We also can inform the population dynamics and the fishery performance considerations, depending on the information and the stock. And then there's 4 levels of concern, and each column gets assigned a number of concern or risk, 1 through 4. And so if there is a higher level of concern, for example, this could just be a place to document that, and there's no further action, but that's now archived, and we can kind of know that we've been considering all these different factors in the past. Or it could be used as a justification by the stock assessment authors to recommend a reduction from the max ABC. So this isn't actually a change in how decisions are made, but it's more formalizing what used to be more of an informal conversations and process, and really documenting that. And in this way, we really have an on-ramp here again for these ecosystem informations to come directly to the assessment authors and inform the ABC in this way. Okay, so now looking more to the future. First, why change what we have going on? And then second, looking at the review and recommendations by the Committee of Independent Experts. So why question our current process and products? So we've had a lot of success, and we're definitely very proud of our achievements in establishing and producing these ecosystem products. And in general, our council welcomes this information each year. But we're always still evolving our system in some way to just try to serve that need even more, try to be more efficient and more effective in how we're bringing ecosystem information into the conversation. And it's largely in response to evolving management needs, changing fish communities, scientific advances. Each year we're iterating and evolving our ESRs, the content and the process. And so this year we decided, instead of this constant iteration, to take a step back and look at the bigger picture to assess future evolutions. Also to perhaps take some larger steps in certain directions. And also to invite others into this discussion to get beyond our small team bubble here and really look at all options. And this is definitely not new to our ESR philosophy. Like I said, it is always iterating and evolving over the years, and this flexibility is actually a core value of our ESR team in really being able to adapt and bring, if we see a better way to do things, to definitely try go in that direction. And so that's all pretty abstract, so I thought I'd give a couple of examples of really some of the changes that are happening in Alaska that we feel ESRs could play a key role in supporting management actions. So for example, in the Bering Sea, the green circle there, management needs. An example here is that usually the winter sea ice extends down into the Bering Sea each winter, driving ocean and ecological dynamics, including the distribution of groundfish. But in the 2014 to 2019 period, there was a reduced sea ice and a loss of sea ice altogether, and the center of gravity of the groundfish community shifted north into the shifted north and into shallower waters from the more southern regions. And so this then returned south by 2021. And so there was this corresponding northward shift of fishing activity. And so that northward movement, including a Pacific cod into the northern Bering Sea, really altered the food web through predation pressure, for example, potential impacts on the snow crab decline, and it really shifted the fishery dynamics as well. And so the challenge here is that our ESRs for this region primarily focus on the Eastern Bering Sea, but there's now a request from the Council, and we definitely recognize the need to include more information from the Northern Bering Sea as well for when these distribution shifts could happen again. And so this involves expanding our data collection in the ESRs and our understanding of what these potential shifts in the system really can mean for groundfish and the broader ecosystem, and how management might anticipate those changes in the future. For the Gulf, I have an example of scientific advances. So here again, we had some strong heat wave years, 2014 to 16 and 2019, and that really, again, impacted the marine ecology in numerous ways. And for example, the Pacific cod stock in the Gulf experienced a dramatic decline, and the fishery was reduced and then closed in 2020. And there was previous and then subsequent science that, when pulled together, really identified multiple reasons for this decline and provided clues of how we might be able to potentially anticipate this in the future. So there was physiological lab work identifying that thermal window of survival for cod larvae. There's collaboration with partners to identify reduced quantity and quality of prey field for the adults. Bioenergetics modeling looked at increased consumption rates. Recent tagging studies show evidence of movement of cod from the Gulf into the Bering Sea, and genetics examining if Goa cod stocks are actually separate stocks or perhaps more mixed with the Bering Sea stocks. So all this, when put together in a very timely manner, which is key, could really help us inform what might happen when the next marine heat wave hits the Gulf. And risk tables were actually created out of this event as a way to quickly communicate some of this ecosystem information in the future as well. And then my final example with the Aleutian Islands, we're seeing a shift in the fish community right now. Adka mackerel and pollock were the main biomass of pelagic foragers, and they're being replaced by northern rockfish and Pacific Ocean perch, as far as which is the more dominant species in the pelagic realm. And so this shift in community, these are all commercially fished species, and so it's really a shift in what is available to the commercial fisheries, and also a shift in really what's happening in the ecology. So these longer-lived rockfish have a longer lifespan, slower turnover rate, that perhaps dampen the effects of environmental variability and increases the stability of the system. But also mackerel and pollock are prey to other commercially fished species such as cod. And so this could have ripple effects throughout the food web. And really the challenge here is to identify and perhaps have even early warnings of a shift in the marine community, tying that to ecological and environmental conditions, to be able to really enable management decisions and industry to keep pace and adapt to these changing fish communities. So my point here is that Alaska is definitely experiencing ecological and environmental change at a rapid pace, and there's fishery management needs to really keep up with these changes, and ESRs are a key tool in our process that could really support management, keeping pace with these changes. But I guess the question is, can we be even more efficient at doing that? And so what we decided was to ask for some review. And so we stepped into a committee of independent experts review at the beginning of this year. We had a review of our Alaska ESRs. And this is a process hosted by NOAA Fisheries Office of Science and Technology. This is a routine service provided by NOAA, and they provide external, independent, and expert reviews of influential science used for policy decisions. And so while that's often applied to stock assessments, it definitely could apply to ecosystem status reports, and this is the first time we've had a review of ecostatus reports in NOAA. And so it was an interesting process to go through, and we all found a lot of value, both in the really knowledgeable reviewers and their comments, and also in the internal discussion that it stimulated within our group. And so I'll just reiterate that I'll go through their recommendations now, and these are still in discussion as we still are discussing this both within the Alaska Center and with the Council to determine what priorities to move forward with. And so we had two objectives: one, to revisit the goals of the ecosystem status reports, and the second, to assess the process of achieving those goals. And while definitely I'll focus on all the recommendations, I want to highlight that there definitely was, this is the pat on the back slide, there was unanimous support and recognition from all the reviewers for the ongoing leading edge work in support of EBFM in Alaska. So we definitely got a lot of support for what we're doing, and this includes the ESRs, the reports, the briefs, the risk tables, the communication, etc. But then a lot of the discussion really focused on how to continue these successful efforts in the most efficient and effective way possible, and really how to leverage all this work and information that we have to support other uses where possible. So for the first objective, revisiting the ESR goals, the two recommendations here, A and B, were first to continue informing the ABC and making that a primary goal. So keep doing what we're doing. We're being pretty successful at that. But consider also informing the other council decisions, like the total allowable catch or the TAC, and other decisions. The council works on many other topics like bycatch, like habitat protection. Obviously, this would involve a lot of conversations with the council to determine where they feel like we could be more supportive. But there is potential there. And so just to go more into detail, again, this is the same diagram I showed before with our focus on that ABC determination. And the CIE reviewers are saying, continue focusing on that, but all the effort and work and information we're collecting and communicating to inform that ABC, perhaps we could leverage that to also support other decisions like the total allowable catch and other council decisions. So for total allowable catch, that could look like trade-off analyses to determine how the quota is allocated across sectors and fisheries and areas. There could be other decision support tools created, different scenario tools, and some of this is done in other regions, and we could look to that to learn. And also, again, this would involve conversations with the council to really determine where they feel we could be helpful and useful. So the second objective is to reassess our process in achieving these goals. And some of the key recommendations are to fill information gaps, but also to integrate and synthesize. Also to streamline our report logistics to try to be more efficient, and that could involve some level of automation and also web presence. And then increasing engagement up and down the pipeline. And by that, I mean up the pipeline would be towards the council, the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and down would be the stock assessment authors, for example, through those risk tables. And so just a little more detail on these three, we already have, again, a lot of contributions. We can easily hit 100 collaborators contributing to our ESRs each year from all different institutions, including NOAA, but also outside of that. Our reports are 200 pages. So sometimes we're thinking, should we get more? But we definitely do have gaps and key critical gaps to fill. And so it's not necessarily just adding more for the sake of adding more, but also strategically filling key gaps. And there was some advice to have internal discussions with a broader team within the Alaska Center to identify which indicators to include and which are the critical gaps. Also a focus on more integration and synthesis, whether that's quantitative or qualitative, to really help communicate and simplify the messages of these indicators. And again, to perhaps look within our Alaska Science Center There is a lot of great modeling efforts going on right now, a lot of climate modeling efforts, for example, that we don't have represented in the ESRs, and some of that is by design in that some of those, the information is less applicable to the 1 to 2 year time frame. Some of them are looking farther out. And so we're looking at different ways of incorporating all these different levels of information. Second recommendation is, again, that report logistics, streamlining, automating, increasing our web presence. And I have a picture of the Alaska Fisheries Information Network here, or ACFIN is the acronym, and this is part of the Pacific States Marine Commission that supports data management for NOAA. And so this is probably where we're headed to increase our web presence. And it's largely right now riding the great work done by Clay Shotwell at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, who's been leading an effort to bring our stock assessments and ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles into this ACFIN platform in a more standardized way. And so we're having discussions right now to bring the ESRs along with those, to have all the pieces of the stock assessment in the same place and creating an online portal for our work. So what this looks like is still very much in discussion, and how much we will bring the ESR to this more automated web presence is still in discussion. We have pros and cons we talk about, but definitely we see value in increasing our web presence here and having our ESR products and presentations and information more accessible. And this ACFIN platform has the potential in the future to host more content. We could look at perhaps reducing report length and having some information as an appendix more on the web. Again, pros and cons to all that. Also, there is potential to support more automation of the ESR process in the future if we choose to go down that road.
The Alaska Fisheries Information Network, which is run by the Pacific States Marine Commission to support data management for NOAA. And this is something that Clay Shotwell at the Alaska Science Center has really led the charge on for other efforts, bringing stock assessments and ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles onto that platform. And so we'll be following suit and looking at our ESRs to create a web presence there as well. We're still talking about really what that will look like and how far to go as far as streamlining and automating and web presence. But some recommendations and some potential options are to automate the contributions of our indicators through this ACFIN platform, potentially automating the report production. There's discussion of data centralization, but those are all really big topics that may or may not best suit our ESR. So we're still thinking about really the best way forward as far as maintaining flexibility and also being sure to accommodate data ownership and security from all our collaborators who are outside of NOAA. Next slide, please. Okay, and so then this final recommendation is, again, to increase engagement up and down the pipeline, both to the council and to stock assessment authors, and to really, again, support more to bring more ecosystem information where we can into the process and support, again, other decisions beyond the ABC. There was some interesting discussion with the CIE committee on how much time we put into outreach with community and industry. And again, it was really interesting. Their focus was more on council and stock assessment authors. We definitely do see a lot of value in that third bubble with the outreach, not only because it helps produce our ESRs, because a lot of our collaborators come from outside of NOAA. It also helps really inform the community and interested stakeholders in what we're doing with the ESRs. So when this information is used by the council, there's often a lot more trust and acceptance by this greater community because they already understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we definitely see value in all three of those bubbles, and we'll have to think about priorities there. Next slide, please. And so this slide has, again, the risk table, highlighting the risk tables, and that was really highlighted by the CIE reviewers. They saw a lot of value in that, as I mentioned earlier. And so again, an area that we already do prioritize it, but we might think of ways of really being more kind of formal with that process and more efficient with that process. So really that's the point here, is to focus perhaps of all these different parts that we've extended over the year to, if we are kind of getting maxed out in all these steps, there's value in all of it, but if we have to prioritize, that risk table, that early engagement is an area to perhaps focus more on. Next slide, please. And this slide is just now a summary of all those CIE recommendations in one spot. Again, really keeping up the good work, continue informing ABCs, but really their recommendation was to really leverage all this effort and information that we do put into informing the ABCs to perhaps be useful in other decisions, such as the total allowable catch and other management decisions. And that would involve engagement with the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council and with stock assessment authors to, where possible, really bring that ecosystem information more into the process. And obviously the recognition that this takes a lot of effort and time, and we are limited in our capacity. And so the one recommendation is to streamline those report logistics to perhaps free up some efficiencies there. Next slide, please. And so the next steps, this is again an ongoing conversation, and we will be talking through these recommendations with the council and with the groundfish plan team in the upcoming months. In the meantime, we will probably be moving forward on some of this web presence and more conversations about risk tables, as those are already ongoing. And then we will be determining future priorities of these recommendations in the coming years. But we really are excited by this whole process and welcome your thoughts and comments as well. And I'll just go to the next slide so I have time for questions. So that next slide says where will we be in 30 years? And really we'll be evolving continually, but some of those core values that we're going to try to hold on to are the trust, the communication, the collaboration in whatever we're bringing and communicating to the council, to the fisheries management process. And really being adaptive and flexible, because change is definitely happening. And in the end, just providing the best available ecosystem science and information to support fishery management decisions. And so the last slide, or next slide, is my last slide. Thank you again for this opportunity and for supporting me through these technical challenges. I hope you got most of all that. And we welcome your thoughts and follow-up questions and comments. Thank you.
We have a first question. The first question asks, do you employ communication specialists for your outreach portion?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We have a great communications team at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, and we definitely work a lot with them, both in producing the visual and written products. For example, our in-briefs are largely produced by them. We provide the outline of the content, and then they really improve on it and provide all the visuals. And then also web content, web stories, and press releases. So definitely a lot of great work with them and great support. Less so with the spoken engagements, I guess I would say. That's more we do on our own, although they're always there for consultation. So it's a great collaboration, and they're really supportive and enthusiastic to be part of this when they can as well.
Thank you. Next question asks, could you name some of the other federal agencies that are involved with collecting data and information for the ESRs?
Federal agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they're federal agencies. That one, I'm suddenly thinking of a lot of state agencies. We collaborate definitely with a lot of Alaska state agencies. I'm not sure if we have USGS components or not, to be honest. I'm trying to think of, not in the Gulf of Alaska, but perhaps in our other regions. Probably more that I'm forgetting. From the state side, we have Fish and Wildlife. We have, oh, that's right. We do have USGS in the Gulf as well for some forage fish. We get seabird data, we get forage fish data from our federal agencies. Those are some of the key ones that come to mind.
Excellent, thank you. This next question asks, would including satellite data for environmental and biological indicators be useful?
It is, and we do. There's always more to be done. We do use satellite and remote sense data for temperature, sea surface temperature, for chlorophyll, for I think those are the two main ones right now. We use it also to create marine heat wave indicators based on the temperature. And definitely we welcome more. That requires, in the past, we've had some really great collaboration actually with folks at the Alaska Fisheries Information Network, which is the web portal I was talking about, to really create collaboration with them and with the Alaska Science Center to create some ways of processing those data and have it readily available to turn out and update a new indicator each fall. And so that's a wave index that we've created there. But temperature and chlorophyll are two of the main ones that we use.
Excellent, thank you. We're getting lots of questions. This next question asks, well, at first gives you a compliment. It says, thank you for a great presentation. For the community collaborators, is there a template of questions used to gather data?
No, these are more, our community collaborators are more individual situations and unique collaborations, and so each one's a little different as far as who's involved and what information we're working with them to exchange. And so it really varies, and a lot of it is driven individually by our lead editors, whether it's Yvette Sidden or Yvonne Ortiz or myself. Largely driven by relationships, largely driven by engagement from or interest from community members. And so it really, we don't have a standard kind of survey, for example, or anything like that yet.
Great, thank you. This next question says, you mentioned that stock assessment models do not always include ecosystem data. Can you outline what are some of the challenges that prevent this? Is large-scale environmental data incorporation something we can feasibly work towards with ease, or does the framework need to be recreated?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a big question. I'll touch on it, and then I'll quickly get outside of my expertise, and so I'll stop. I think there's a large desire to include ecosystem information into stock assessment models, but it is still really challenging, which is why there's still a lot of models that do not have it. And I think some of the challenges are really to have such a good understanding of the relationships between the population dynamics and the productivity and ecosystem and environmental dynamics, and to have those relationships consistent over time and not break apart, which they often have been observed to do. And so to have a reliable, understanding, mechanistic relationship for these various stocks is still challenging for us to know and rely upon to include in these stock assessment models. And so For now, what we're doing in Alaska is to bring in that information in a more qualitative context to support the models. But there's definitely a lot of research and a lot of smart people who have models that are looking at exploring different connections with ecosystem and environmental information, but to really pass that last hurdle of having it accepted as a working model by the council, that's a high bar, as it should be, to make sure it's really understanding those connections really well.
Thank you.